Louise Kold, who is a Danish artist, but has been living in Sweden for many, many years, and now living also part-time in Malta. And she's the one, I hope you've seen it. If you haven't, make sure, well, there's going to be a bit of time left for you to see it afterwards. The exhibition upstairs in the upper galleries of what we call metal art. It's not exactly metal art. It's a lot more than just metal art, but it is made of metal, yes. She's the one who's been talking about that. Now, some of you might be thinking that there's going to be a sort of demonstration. There can't be. If there were to be a demonstration, you'd all have to be kitted in spaceman gear with oxygen and masks, because she works with chemicals that basically, I'm amazed she's here to talk to you today, because they are incredibly dangerous. She will be talking about that, she'll be talking about that approach. Plus, something about Marie Louise Kold that she might be too Scandinavian to say is that she is extremely well known in her part of Scandinavia. All of Denmark, most of the southern part of Sweden, people flock to her exhibitions, they go to her studio regularly to see her art, they buy her art, which is amazing. I won't say she sells out exhibitions, but almost. She really does a tremendous job. She's worked very hard to get where she is because she has a very unique type of art. She's not about to brag about herself, but that's why I'm here, to brag about her. But I'll leave it up to her to actually explain how she works, her approach to art, and up to a certain point, I won't say more importantly, but as importantly, how she has managed to make sure that her art gets to her clients, gets to the people who really, want to have it. This is very important. Ladies and gentlemen, Marie Louise Kold.
Being an artist is not like being just any business person. My life and work life is very, very different. I have a Band-Aid budget that is out of this world. I often walk around during the workday looking like a spaceman. And I have been asked by security staff to get off an airplane before takeoff because my very innocently packed artistic material triggered terror alerts. I've also had royal visits to my studio, the future Queen of Sweden and her husband. And I have sold works costing over 50,000 euros each. But being an artist is also just like being a businessman or a woman in many ways. And I'll be touching on that later, but first I need to get to the core of this, to what started all of this, the passion, the reason that I'm even into all the other stuff around it. I was at art school in Sweden, started in 1996, and in 97, by that time, we tried lots of different materials. We've been working with drawing life models. We had worked with clay and different techniques, industrial design, and we touched on copper printing. Copper printing is a really wonderful technique. Of course, it goes back centuries. It's basically about creating an indentation, a structure in a copper plate. You either scratch straight into it, or you use a covering layer of wax, and brilliant. Then you just scratch into the wax and let an acid do the work of actually digging, eating into the metal, so that when you get it out of the acid and clean off the wax, you have the same pattern of text or whatever you've made it. Then you rub oil paint into it, press a paper over it, and the paint will transfer, so that you end up with a copper print. This can, of course, the benefit of this is that it can be done tens or hundreds of times, so that you end up with a lot of copper prints. And I love this process. But I then went on to do something else. And a few months later, I was doing something else entirely, and I just happened to stumble on that first piece of copper. And it had changed. It had gotten so wonderful. I could see my fingerprints in it. You know, from just having been a shiny piece of copper, it had transformed. it was so alive, and I just, with a pounding heart, I thought I'm going to get the best copper print ever. And so I went through the whole process of rubbing in the paint and got into all the ridges, etc., made the print, and it looked just like the first one. Because it turned out that all those changes in the metal were in the metal. They weren't on top of it. So they simply couldn't be transferred. And I was so disappointed I stopped printing. But I also realized I found my material. It's the metal I have to work with. And in one way, it was an easy decision because I fell for it. It was just heart-skippingly wonderful. But on the other hand, I didn't exactly make my life very easy there. Because it's hard, it's heavy, it's dirty, I injure myself. It doesn't always cooperate. If you're working with paper or a canvas, I mean, that can be challenging enough, but generally what happens is what you apply to it. Here, I have a material that has a will of its own. And that is, on the one hand, what I'm in love with, because it adds so much, but it also really frustrates me because I suppose that's my Scandinavian side. I very much like to get from point A to point B. Planning it and getting there, and it never happens. But there's just no argument, because when you fall for something, when you find a material like that, that just is you, that is yours, it's a given. So I dove into that. I started, whatever project we had at art school, I got metal into it, no matter what we did. After art school, I studied archaeology for a year at Lund University, focusing on how metals change over thousands of years and what happens to them. Then I became a bronze caster. I don't actually cast anything in bronze now, but I do use a lot of the metallurgy, quite a bit of the chemistry, and all of that together gave me a starting point. So that in February, about early 2001, I could start full-time as an artist. By then, I had also developed it. So I was working with brass and with bronze. I was not just letting the metals change and letting nature do its bit. I wanted to push those processes. So I was experimenting with lots of different chemicals, using up a lot of Band-Aids, spending a lot of time on the phone with the Swedish Toxic Information Central, learning every step of the way. I've always worked with texts, and it used to really frustrate me when I was doing a copper printing that text had to be reversed to be printed correctly. But of course I could just forget about that. I would just have it the way I wanted it on the metal and develop all of this. Brass and bronze are, of course, alloys which also contain copper, so they will also you'll get a patina that is alive and that can change over time. Some years later, when I felt like painting, it was obvious to me that I would paint on the metal. What better with canvas? Why? So I took to the metal. All the other colours you see here, and those were extent you're actually seeing colours, but the colours you see are all chemicals that react with the metal. The female figures are painted with oil paint. Everything else is just a chemical reaction. So I started in early 2001 at zero, basically, and just knew one thing: I was going to do this full time. I didn't have, my family isn't into the arts, I hadn't gone to the Royal Academy of Art, there was no shortcut anywhere. There was just absolute determination. I wanted to make a living doing this. And in Sweden, that's quite rare. Most artists go into the job of being an artist thinking, well, you can't make a living doing this, so, and then they hit their heads against the wall trying to get scholarships. They try to live off unemployment benefits. They get other jobs and do the art on the side. But I felt all of those solutions to me would be compromises. They would take time away from my time at the studio. And it wasn't just a question of making a living as an artist. It was a question of making a living as an artist doing what I wanted. Because otherwise, what's the point? So it was with that determination I started. I worked 80 hours a week, and I had to, every single month, dig into my very meager savings to make ends meet. In fact, 2 years later, first 2 months of 2003, I had a turnover of see Swedish kroner, about slightly less than 300 euros. Not earnings, turnover. And I was working 80 hours a week. That's when it starts getting frustrating and you start wondering, what else can I do? Because you can't double the time. If you're working 80 hours a week, there's no chance to double it. But let's say you could double it. Well, what am I looking at then? A turnover of, say, 600 euros a month? That's still not going to cut it. So I had to apply the same creativity that I poured into my art into everything that surrounds the art. And I think one thing that many people now say, but that was really in your favor. You know, creating art that is so different. Well, it's definitely in my favor now, because if people like what I do, there aren't going to be 4 or 5 others making something very similar. So in that sense, there's not a lot of competition. But to begin with, it was not in my favor. You know, people would tell me, oh, very strategic. Well, first of all, no strategy. I just fell in love with a bit of metal. But secondly, it worked against me. Sure, people would say, ooh, fascinating, interesting. Galleries would exhibit my art based on wanting to show their audience something unusual, not because they thought they'd make any money off me. And people just weren't buying it. And I very quickly, well, not quickly enough, I had some struggles there, but I soon realized it's not a question of not being good enough. And I think there are so many artists who are brilliant, who are not making a living, thinking it must be because I'm not good enough, and they struggle some more. But being good enough is not enough. It takes so much else all around the art. I also was surrounded by a lot of helpful people who wanted to tell me how hard it was, how difficult things were. I don't know how many of those there are here in Malta, but we have a lot of them in Scandinavia. You know, they thought we're doing our a favor by, you know, those high-flying dreams, and you're going to make it come down here. Especially artists who were a bit older than me, and perhaps hadn't succeeded quite as well as they thought they should have, were quite keen to help me in that regard. And that's enormously hard to resist, because you're already using up a lot of energy working 80 hours a week. Also having to use a lot of energy trying to push away these people, and you don't have any arguments why they're wrong. I mean, everything I was doing was proving them right, because I wasn't making it. But I just held to my belief, and to something my dad has always said. He said the human body is made of 72% water, and the rest is pure will. And will alone won't get you all the way. I mean, you need the whole basis, you need the talent and the training and all of that, of course, and the struggling, but will makes an enormous amount of difference. So I think a lot of the reason why I actually made it is going into it with a conviction that I will and I can make a living doing this. There was actually a series of articles in my local paper in Sweden, a very good paper generally, a few years ago, where they were interviewing people in the arts. So there were actresses, painters, musicians, and they were asking them about the combination of working with culture and being an entrepreneur. And I thought, brilliant, until I read what the artist said. She said, as an artist, you are not just an entrepreneur, you're also entirely dependent on money from the state. Well, of course you are, with that attitude. That's a given. I also look at it as having and taking responsibility for my talent and for what I care about. I'm not leaving it in the hands of others, asking for, I mean, there's nothing wrong with scholarships, they're brilliant if you can get them, but I felt that being dependent on them would put my fate and my life and what I wanted to do in the hands of someone else. I wanted to be more in control. As an artist, of course, you're not supposed to care about money. I don't know how common that is here, but generally in Scandinavia, you're supposed to just love what you do so much it doesn't matter if nobody ever buys it. And that's nice. Until, you have to pay rent. But then they do say in Scandinavia that some artists will consider the electricity bill an unexpected expense. I can't live like that. And I don't see anything wrong with actually making money off your art. I mean, it's not as if you got into it to get rich in the first place. I think there are quicker ways, or better ways. But if you're good at what you do, if you're well educated, and if you work hard at it, then why not? Why shouldn't you actually be paid well for it as well? Plus, I mean, it's very basic math. At the end of the month, things have to add up. You can't be a full-time artist if you're addicted from your studio, or from your home, or if you can't afford to buy food, or if you can afford those things, but you can't afford to buy materials. I mean, money is a really brilliant thing, and I've discovered also how making a profit is brilliant for artistic integrity. Because I had an exhibition in Copenhagen many years ago, and I sold loads. It was a huge success, and I ended up with a stomachache. Because the woman who ran the gallery was quite paranoid, unpleasant to work with, and I just felt really bad. So 3 years later, when she asked me to please come back, probably with dollar signs in her eyes, I said no. And I felt really rich. And I felt that I was safeguarding my art in that instance. My well-being, my art. That was the best decision I could have made then. Because there's a lot of talk in Scandinavia about taking care of yourself. Don't stress too much. Don't, as we say, run into the wall. Because if you get stressed out, burned out, that's serious. And that is incredibly serious. And it could take years to get back from it. But what if I stop feeling passionate about my art? What if I stop feeling like creating it? What if I am no longer inspired? I don't like being at my studio? Well, you don't get that back easily. So making decisions that safeguard that protect that, I felt was extremely important. And making money and having the chance to say no to things helped me a lot there. Also, when I have ideas, sudden inspiration, I don't have to wait 3 months until I can afford the tools. I can go out, I can buy them, I can work while I'm inspired. So I don't make my art to make money, but I make sure I make money so that I can make my art. And I think most importantly of all, I don't compromise. Because at the studio, I'm just an artist. I'll forget the day of the week. Honestly, there have been times when I have been a bit clueless for a while about even the time of year or what year to sign the work with. I can lose the hammer 4 times in the same half hour. I'm a stereotypical artist. But outside the studio, it doesn't actually reduce the value, the artistic value of a work of art that you apply better strategy. Once the work is finished, I look at it and I say, okay, where is the potential market for this? Do I already have a former client who might be interested in it? Should it be on my website, in my newsletter? Which exhibition or art fair should I show it at? So applying a bit of strategy after the work is created, in my world, diminishes the artistic value about as much as an author going on a book signing tour. The work of art is ready, the work of art is there, it doesn't change that. So I've basically always been working with this at the back of my mind. At first it was more intuitive and then I was more deliberate. But it's never about actively selling. It's just about making your art seen so that people have a chance so that to at least decide, is this something I would like to buy or not? You're not, the vacuum salesman knocking on doors and trying to push something on people, quite the opposite. I've also always worked with branding in a way. I realized that I needed a presence online. I couldn't afford anything. I'm a great believer in do what you do best. Pay others to do what they do best. But of course, that does take some degree of money, of which I had none. So I was stuck creating my own website. I also, after the first couple of years, I was talked into having my first catalog printed. The one I have here, which you'll also get a copy of if you'd like, is number 5. But the first one, that was a hurdle, because I had no money. And I felt that's a luxury thing. That's something you get when you have money left over from something. But have been careful about how I interact with people or what I would send to galleries. I would be very careful. I'd have printed photos of my art. I'd glue them on nice paper and write carefully underneath. And, I tried to be as proper as I could. But of course, it didn't quite sit with cat. And I quickly realized, once I had it printed, that things are not just what they are. Things, to a large degree, are also what they seem to be. And that might not be entirely fair, but if that's the way it is, you might as well know the rules and play by them. Sending this out made people think, at least in Sweden, because something like this in Sweden would probably cost €2.5. So they were thinking, oh, hey, she must be really successful to have one of these. And success sells. I had an exhibition in Paris, wonderful little theatre that was combined with a gallery, Montmartre, Paris, 2003. I couldn't really afford it. I flew down with the art in my suitcase and all my, my clothes and everything else in my little carry-on. There's no extra money for anything. And I didn't sell a thing. But when I got back, and a couple of journalists in Sweden asked me, so how did the exhibition go? I said, great. Because I got lots of wonderful feedback. So many sweet comments, so much interaction with people who saw it and liked it. I didn't lie, I never said I sold anything, but signaling that things are going well tends to rub off. People would rather hear a success story than buy art from the sobbing artist who's worried about not being able to pay rent, and it catches on. I've also started sending out newsletters. I realized that that's a brilliant way of keeping in touch with people that I've met or who bought my art in the past, and being un-Scandinavian in that I can brag a bit about what's going well. In Sweden, and all of Scandinavia, we have Jante. Jante was an old Norwegian guy, I think, and he has since established the law of Jante, which means you shall not blow your horn. Don't think you're anything. Don't think you're special. Keep down. Shh. So saying, hey, look at me, I'm good at this. That's really just waiting to get whacked on the head. You have to. You can't just sit there and wait for someone else to come along and say, oh, wow, you're good. And for other people to lift you. You have to bounce a bit yourself. I also have an open house at my studio every year to invite people to come in to see, not quite how I work, because as George said, I have to give out gas masks at the door and that wouldn't work. But to invite them into my studio. So apart from the gallery events, there's also my studio. Some wise person has said that creativity without strategy is art. And creativity with strategy is marketing. That's how I look at it. I try to pour the same creative energy and all that emotion that I pour into my art, I try to pour into my how I get my art out there as well. The number of things I've gotten away with, or seen art students next to me get away with, or just artists, what do you expect? And instead of just saying, well, I got perfect, I have just a ticket here to just be, I saw that as a golden opportunity to have an advantage. Have my act together. Actually send out proper invoices. Show up on time. Mistakes happen, they always happen, but at least have, at the studio, I'm the muddle-headed artist who forgets the day of the week and don't know where the hammer is, but outside the studio, basically, when it's a question of someone giving you their money, I think you get much further by being the business person, not just the artist. Especially in some cases where it's an advance of 15,000, 20,000 euros. And all they get in return is a piece of paper. They have to trust that contract, trust you, not to just run for it. I don't know if you get Dragon's Den here on TV. It's a bunch of investors and groups, people who have ideas come up in front of them and try to sell their ideas, try to get investments. Well, there's a guy there, an investor called James Kahn. And he said, what a lot of people don't realize is people buy people first. So as an artist, you can't just say, but I don't matter, it's what's on the wall. You know, ignore me and my unwashed hair and my flip-flops. It's the artwork that matters. That doesn't work. You are your art. Whether you like it or not, you are and represent your brand. Then we go into how I actually work with the metal. When you see works like these, nothing has actually been cut out. I cover the metal with bitumen. Bitumen was what got me suspected of being a terrorist, by the way, but I've since managed to get it here anyway. So I cover the metal with bitumen. Every bit that I want to retain is covered. And then I put it in a bath of nitric acid for anything from 4 days to about a week and a half, checking on it every day. And adding a bit of nitric acid, lifting up a side that has already been etched through, and sometimes it'll actually, just the nitric acid will just go crazy because it depends on so many things. It depends on exact concentration, which is difficult to figure out once it's already etched quite a bit. And it depends on the temperature and the humidity and so many things I can't control fully. So sometimes there will be surprises where lots of work, not just hours, but days and sometimes weeks of work will just be ruined. But there are also times when the unexpected can actually be brilliant. I work a lot with text. I love words. Mostly I use Karen Blixen's words. I read her for the first time when I was 20 and they just hit me right there. And I don't think it's very important that you can read it, that you can understand it, that you know where it's from, that you can interpret it. I just love the text. So, as in this case, I love the rhythm of it. I love, like we can appreciate Asian, different signs, Asian writing. You don't have to understand it to actually appreciate it. Although, of course, if you do understand it, you will get something else out of it. I've since actually started including a bit of English and lately also a bit of Maltese in the works, trying to learn it. But to me, it's all emotional. It's never planned up here. It's all straight from there. Karen Blixen is the author of the words. So I worked a lot with these texts, and there was once when I had written a lot of text in the wax, and I dipped it in the acid, and the next day when I came to check, I was after just indents of the text, but it had etched all the way through. So my first reaction was, no, it's ruined. Or maybe it's even better. But of course, the next step was to try to replicate that, at which point I just got a hole straight through the whole thing and nothing worked at all. So the moment I think I figured it out, I'm in for a surprise. That's me at my Malta studio, not wearing the spaceman gear. So I work so much with text. I also work with different three-dimensional works, materials, especially copper foil. That is basically as thin as paper, 0.05 millimeters, and very easily shaped. Also horribly easy to cut yourself on, but I like to touch it, I like to feel it. And then it's stabilized from the back. This is Saline from upstairs. So I like all the structures I can get into these works. I like the combination of the different colors, the text, the three-dimensional, the two-dimensional, the rhythm it creates. Again, an oil painting on the metal. I got a very big commission some years ago for a big reception area in Copenhagen. Gorgeous place, but there was a bad echo. And they said, we'll be soundproofing the ceiling, but that doesn't cut it. So this freestanding wall behind the reception area, we also want to soundproof. But we don't want to cover it with just your average cover for soundproofing. Either metal that's perforated or wood or plaster or whatever. They said, we want a work of art. But of course, I had to work closely with an acoustics expert to fulfill that side of it. So the original plan was actually that I was supposed to get industrially perforated, so just lots of little holes, copper and brass, patinate that, combine it with bits that weren't patinated, and put it on a huge wall that was 5.5 meters by 280. But a bit into the process, I started realizing, hold on, just a few months ago, I made holes all the way through that text I was etching, which I thought was ruined. I can perforate my own metal. So I had a chat with the acoustics expert, and I said, how does sound behave? Does it need any particular size of hole to get through? Does it work? Had a long discussion about that, and we actually figured out that it would work so long as a certain percentage of the wall would let sound through to the soundproofing. And I worked with so many different patterns. I etched all the way through large sections of some squares. It's coming up here in a bit so you can see some examples of it. And it was a fascinating and slightly terrifying project, because I could have just stuck with that which I knew. I could have just said, well, this is safe, I know how to do this, let's go there. Instead, I wanted to push the boundaries. I wanted to take it further, to see what can the material do and what am I capable of. So, quite nerve-wracking. But I figured, for once, it was a well-paid job, and I thought that has to pay for a couple of sleepless nights then, and all the adrenaline just buzzing around my body, and it worked. Here's another example of lots of text, and this is a close-up of one of the works upstairs where I use, again, a lot of handwriting. So I like working with layers. I like the different structures and how they interact. After that big project in Copenhagen, I was inspired to work more like that. Instead of just having soundproofing, which of course most people won't have built into their art, I would work with layers of other metal behind the outer grids that have been etched. And then I realized, hold on, I'm carrying around all this metal. My pockets are full of metal, my handbag weighs a ton. I can't let go of my metal. I want to have it with me. I want to touch it. There has to be a better way to do this, I thought. So I came up with Touch, portable art. It is works of art where there's a little bit that is attached by use of a magnet inside the work. You take it out, put it on a necklace, and you can actually take a bit of your artwork with you when you leave home. And then, coming home, instead of just taking it off, putting it in a jewelry box or in a drawer, it goes back up on the wall as part of the artwork. Some of the pieces that are upstairs were created especially for this space. In the first room, opposite Karen Dixon's eyes, you will see that long, almost 5-meter long work of blue Mediterranean swirls created especially for here. But the exhibition is actually a mix of very recent works of the past few years, and then going back and including a few of my older portraits. I would like to just mention a couple of other unartistic things. Because of course, as an artist, you're not supposed to... I mean, a lot of artists don't think long term. When I was studying to become a bronze caster, we would work with cire perdu, so the lost wax method, where, to cut a long story short, the process involves bashing up a lot of old plaster casts. So I had a room in front of me, and it was so filled with white dust that it looked like a white wall. And there were artists in there, zero protection. And they would just cough a bit and say, yeah, it's good for the light. And the way I figure, I'm not just aiming to be an artist for 10 years or 20, hopefully 30 or 40. So, very unartistically, I try to get myself. I exercise regularly. I try to get enough sleep. I eat regularly. And when I'm at my most busy, I eat every 3 or 4 hours, because I cannot afford a dip in efficiency. So I figured that in some regards you have to see yourself as a top business person. where you're adding all the bits that this demanding job takes. And the wonderful thing is that the art actually benefits from it. Taking really good care of yourself. And part of taking good care of yourself is actually making sure that when things do go well, celebrate properly. Too often we're busy having a goal up there, that all these little goals on the way, woohoo, and then you just look this way. You don't really look back and see how far have I gotten. I always have a bottle of champagne in the fridge. It doesn't get opened very often. But it's a wonderful thing. On a really busy, and well, for Scandinavia, often grey and rainy and cold, you know, Tuesday morning, you open that fridge to get the milk for the cereal, and there's the bottle of champagne. Just waiting for that goal to be achieved, for something good to happen. And also important is that when good things do happen, celebrate with friends who appreciate it. Sweden, you often have to balance things. Things shouldn't be too good. Sweden is a wonderful place in many ways, but yeah. You know, people will, oh, you know, I had this exhibition, and you know, it was great, and so many people came to the opening, but now, of course, you know, I'm feeling sick, and I'm knackered, and I just worked too hard. You know, things shouldn't be too good. When things go well, celebrate, enjoy them, and have people around you who actually genuinely appreciate and love that success with you. There is the actual wall at Valletta in Copenhagen. Trying hard to, there you see, industrially perforated metal combined with what I did. Upstairs you will see some squares, 50 by 50 centimeters. That was the size of exactly of all of those squares in Copenhagen. I also find that having strategy meetings is brilliant, also very unartistic, but it's great. As a counterpoint to all those helpful people who were telling me how hard things were, I surrounded myself with a small group of women who just wanted so much, and who were helpful and who were positive, and they're still my friends today. That was 2001. Several of them actually flew down to come to the opening here. So these women, they look at, you know, where do we want to go? How can we have fun on the way there? And how can we help each other get there? And we have a strategy meeting once a year, where we look ahead. What do we want to accomplish? Or say, in a year's time, what will we be saying cheers to with our glasses of champagne? What will we be celebrating having accomplished? And if you don't have a group of people, you can actually have a strategy meeting with yourself. The important thing is to not get lost in the day-to-day, in the short term, which I think happens very easily whether you're an artist or not, especially if you're running your own company or whatever your passion is. It's so easy to just see it short term that you forget the bigger goals. And that's often a challenge. But having a strategy meeting, just sitting down and deciding, I want to do this and that, and I'm going to get there bit by doing these things. It's been useful to me to go back and actually be able to tick off a lot of goals. And I have to admit, one of the big ones was to have an exhibition here, in this really amazing place. I mean, you guys, you're used to the Maltese light. You're lucky. Some of the works, when I packed them in Sweden, I thought, yeah, well, we'll see if this makes it to the exhibition. I might decide to leave it out once. It was just finished, so I hadn't really sort of gotten used to it. I just saw it, and of course, my works will change quite a bit over the first few weeks. So during those weeks, it was packed in a crate. So probably a few changes happened there. But then the light. When I opened the crates and I got it up here, the works look completely different. It's something, maybe also in the metal, that it's so alive. And of course, that actually continues. The changes in the metal, the life in the metal, isn't just while I work with it. The metal remains alive. Someone bought my art, and you can touch it. Oh, yeah, if you go upstairs and touch it, go ahead, but if your fingers turn blue, don't put them in your mouth. And you can cut yourself, so be a bit careful. But I like them being touched. I can't stop touching them. I think that's such, you know, see people at an exhibition, often they'll do this, and their nose will be this far from the artwork. And the relief in their eyes and their whole bodies when I say, you can go ahead and touch it. But that's part of it. You should experience it like that. Touching text that has been etched deeply into metal, almost like hammering it into stone, into a rock. It makes it permanent, suddenly forever. So anyway, this a client bought my art and said, oh, but I'd like to touch it. But won't it change more if I touch it every day? Yep. But that's okay. Maybe that's the archaeology side of it. Museums, I've always preferred the real thing that's dented and has a patina and is a bit, skewed from the perfect polished replica in the museum shop. I want it to show traces of human interaction. So if my art can go on to do that, because whoever bought it likes to touch it every day, wonderful. How much they change will also depend on where they're placed. In Malta, of course, high humidity, close to the sea, they'll change a bit faster. But it is a very slow process. It'll take years and years for you to see any kind of difference. But I like the fact that the material is alive, and I would really hate to varnish it, because that would kill it. That would be like saying, okay, up to here, now I'm done, so stop, no more. Plus, I think it would look horrible under the varnish a couple of decades from now, but apart from that, the very fact that the metal was alive was what I fell in love with. So I can't deprive it of that possibility of changing, of being continuously alive. So all the works you actually see upstairs will change and have changed. We've noticed, especially with the new works, they'll change more over the first couple of weeks. I have two big works on the wall in the corridor. There's Cavalier and Salim. And Cavalier has developed, it's very dark brownish black, has developed little specks of blue in the grooves. So yeah, I'm following these changes, and I'm in love with how the metal suddenly is interacting with Malta. Don't know if I've covered everything. Are there questions? Anything else you would like me to go into?
Feel free to ask questions.
Yeah.
The science man, so be careful. He's the one with science in his brain. So.
Okay.
Edward?
Thanks. Again, that's quite a cliche. Could you tell us a bit more about the different chemicals you use and how you bring out the different colors? And you get some beautiful blues, but yellows, greens.
Well, the blues are quite basic in a way. Ammonia and ammonium chloride on copper. Those two alone will give you a blue. In fact, there's a more basic way. I don't use it, don't worry, but you can pee on it. In fact, the roof layers, when they change roofs on old, especially in Scandinavia, churches will have copper roofs. They would often finish the roof laying by peeing on it to speed up, to sort of kick off that process, because there's ammonia. So basically those two. But you can also use copper nitrate, add that to it, copper sulfate. What I do is these processes take time. And there are so many variables that I can't control, such as exact humidity in the room. I mean, it's not a laboratory, it's a studio. So I can't control the humidity or the temperature exactly. It's also a question of how clean is my copper? Not just the surface, but the actual, how many % copper is it? Is it completely pure? And then exactly what concentration of ammonia am I using, ammonium chloride, which order are they being sprayed on the surface? And I've discovered recently that it also matters greatly whether I leave the surface uncovered or whether I actually put plastic over it and leave it to dry very, very slowly over time. So, yeah, I get more of a clue. I've been doing this for 17 years now. And I learn more all the time, but I still get surprised. And the moment I think I have it figured out, so I work a lot with nitric acid. Nitric acid is wonderful and absolutely lethal. You know, quite often I've gotten a splash on me and I no longer need to call those toxic expert people. I know what it is, you know. Go home, stand in the shower 45 minutes.
What concentration of nitric acid?
53%.
That's very
Yeah. It's, I mean, it'll give you
Yeah.
very, very serious burns. That's why it's 45 minutes in the shower. But it will also react with the metal. You get orange smoke, and that's why I wear the breathing equipment. In fact, I'm far away from houses. I'm out in the middle of nowhere. I have bright green. It's not a fashion statement. That was the only color it came in. Bright green protection suit, boots up to here, gloves up to there, because I can't afford there to be any trickle. An engine on my back, double filters of military precision, and a tube going up so that all the air I breathe is completely clean. And the wonderful thing is that when I was doing this last, a couple of months ago, a little old man out for a walk comes up to me, sticks his head in the orange smoke and says, "So what are you doing there?" And I'm standing there sounding like, because that's what it sounds like when you breathe in this thing, trying to, it's dangerous, all right. And he goes, "That's fine, how interesting." So he seemed to not quite take it very seriously, but it could actually give you water in the lungs and could kill you. So perhaps not the portraits. You can even do it more basic than that. Rainwater. If you've ever seen any outdoor copper being put up, you'll see that it's only really shiny coppery for a few weeks. Quite quickly it gets dark. Darker and darker, gets black, and then after a few decades, or years probably in Malta, because you're closer to the sea, there's more salt in the air, more humidity, it'll get green. You'll get that traditional pattern. But
You can say months.
months? There you go, months. Well, Scandinavia, it's years. So what I did was I put out bronze, sheets of bronze. I sandblasted it to get a rugged surface. I put bronze outside and let it just rain on it. Now, Sweden's a wonderful place for that. You do get a lot. So every couple of days, I would bring in a sheet of metal, and they would get darker and darker and darker, up to about a month and a half, when I had sort of medium browns. By then, I'd also collected rainwater, and I added just a bit more sulfur to it to get a higher concentration of sulfur, and applied heat. And thereby got from the medium browns to the darker browns, the grey, the browns, the purples, the blacks, and then had a great variety of sheets, bronze sheets with different colors. Even within the same sheet, there would be variations depending on how the rain had moved. And then cut it up into very, very precise squares. Started with 5,000 squares, and then started creating a massive puzzle. So Hans Christian Andersen, that you see upstairs in the corridor, was created like this. I have, let me see if I can find it. The same with Karen Blixen's eyes. These came about, actually, this was the first work I ever made like that, because I thought, with many exceptions, but still, a lot of portraits are mainly interesting to the person they depict, or to their families, or people who know them. And I thought, I want to create a portrait that can be appreciated on a purely abstract level, and also be photographic. So, in actual fact, although it's new techniques, and I'm not the first to do it, obviously, but perhaps the first to do it in this particular way, using metal and rainwater, it ends up looking like a pixelated photo. I had a couple of groups of students upstairs this morning, and I was showing them this. And a big group of students, some were a bit too close to it, and some just didn't see it. And then they backed up, and oh yeah, okay, they got it, they could see it. But there was one girl who she wasn't seeing it. To her, it was just abstract squares. And actually, I love that. I love people who first get that abstract experience. But of course, I wanted her to also see the photographic side of it. So I told her, take your glasses off. She said, it was visible. She took a step back and smiled. And that's the effect I was after. Getting up close, really close, you can fall in love with the pattern inside each little square, almost like a landscape. Just one single square. Back up and you have a cluster of squares, just a totally abstract mosaic. Back up a bit more, and in the case of Hans Christian Andersen, yeah, okay, you get that it's supposed to be a face, but it doesn't actually look like much, and you can't tell who it is. Back up all the way in the corridor, there he is. So you can get quite far just using sulfur, rainwater. I also use, acetic acid. Of course, one problem with a lot of the things I use is that they won't be, you can't have it on a sculpture outside and have it remain, say, bright blue. So while I've learned a lot from bronze casting, there are some limitations there that I don't have to worry about, so long as my art is indoors. But a great mix. In fact, I had an email 2 days ago from a woman who said, I just have a question, how do you learn how to work with metal the way you do? I make some pieces of jewelry and I want to give them your surfaces. And it's wonderful when I can inspire. Yes, right, there he is. Wonderful when I can inspire people and when I get these questions, but I don't have a good answer. Because the answer is, go to art school, study archaeology, become a bronze caster, and experiment with great frustration for 17 years. Because there aren't any shortcuts. Even when I would love to, even when I myself am trying to get a particular color, I know which direction it's going in, sometimes. But even I get massive surprises. And they are sometimes enormously frustrating and costly, because the material, of course, is...
Excellent.
But, when they're good, they make up for all that. As an example, the nitric acid I buy, not cheap. But the interesting thing is that once it loses its effectiveness in etching the metal, it's still dangerous to the environment, of course, and to people. I then have to pay more than I paid to buy it for a chemical company to destroy it safely. Any more questions?
Really a case of science meeting art, Edward.
Yeah. Yes. What's the point?
Are you doing this work in Malta, or do you do it all in...
Well, I would love to, but I need a fully equipped studio, and it's much too expensive to have 2 of those. I need so many different tools, and it's always a case of whatever, inspiration often comes from being surrounded by all the materials. So you can't just say, well, I'm just going to work with these 3 things and bring those. You can't do 10% of the work having 10% of the materials. And also, we have a wonderful flat here in Malta, but we don't actually have an extra separate room just for this. And even if we did, it doesn't work. You can't, not with those chemicals, even just using a metal file or a metal cutter in the flat. We'd have metal shavings on the floor and not safe. But of course I can't help it. So, I do have a little bit of much less harmful acid on the balcony in a small tray, so when I make small scale things I can reach a little bit.
You haven't heard it.
No, very safe. Neighbors need not worry. And we have just, because I can't help it, I need to. We've just bought a metal cutter so that I can work. It'll have to be on the balcony, thank God for the Maltese weather, so that I can actually cut a bit of metal here, and it is possible for me to work small scale. But since the majority of my market is in Scandinavia, it wouldn't, sadly, really make sense for me to make all my art here and then pay to ship it to Sweden and sell it there. So, I work here to the extent that I can with metal, and then seeing exhibitions, going for walks here, just taking in the atmosphere, the culture, the history, meeting people, artists, drawing, sketching, taking photos. So it is mostly a case of input when I'm in Malta and then output when I'm in Sweden. But I couldn't do it without Malta.
Anybody else? Yes?
Yeah.
Why did you choose Malta?
Well, I have to admit he has a bit to do with that.
I'm sorry.
Yes. I fell in love with George and then I fell in love with Malta. So I think...
I usually think it's the other way around, but we don't tell people that.
But I think it's... I mean, I'd love to just be here full time. But on the other hand, if you do have to live in two places in Europe, it's not such a bad thing to have Sweden and Malta. That combination is nice. And I mean, it would be difficult for me to make portraits like the Hans Christian Andersen one here. I mean, you guys can go months without rain. So there are benefits to having our lives split between two parts of Europe.
Yes. No.
Do you have any outdoor works? Because your video doesn't...
He is our broadcaster. Well, there you go. Just so you know who you're talking to.
Well, I don't really I have had a few clients.
Yeah, there you go. Noel, kan je bezig?
I work across from you.
Wow, that is hard work. Very hard work.
And I usually do patterns, so that's just...
Oh wow. Oh, we need to have a chat.
Sure.
It's
Basically, you can do it without him.
No,
Okay.
I will never be able to.
Okay, just...
I have not yet done anything for outdoors, but I have spoken to a couple of architects in Scandinavia. We've discussed the possibility of maybe having some of my metal being part of a facade. It would take much too long, of course, to create a facade like this, but having a segment. It would just be a question of which patina you use for it. I have also had a few clients ask me, can we hang this outdoors? And in some cases it's been entirely possible from a metal point of view, but it's been mounted on a wooden frame, so for that reason it doesn't work. But if it's made with the intention of ending up outside, it's just a question of the process of how it's created and which chemicals you use to get which colors so that they are embedded in the metal and not sort of powdery on the surface. So that's very possible.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
Because usually after some time, the elements tend to make it uniform.
You could use a
Because
combi.
and maybe if you use different methods.
That's what I'm thinking. Because
not
brass
different
and copper
chemicals
would
on the same
age,
metal, that won't work.
they would age
That
differently.
won't work.
Or you can work with textures, because if one surface is...
Texture, yes, of course. But
And-
it leaves the relief. Okay.
Exactly, and that would also pattern
But
it differently.
on a chromatic level, time will
Probably.
even out.
But I think I'm okay with that. I'm friends with time on that level. That's okay. That's,
No,
the work of art
your
becomes
work-
also a way of measuring time.
Yes, but your work is painting with different chemicals, so you get a different reaction from the metal, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the elements tend to wipe out that over a period of time, yes.
Well, I suppose it depends
That's
on...
for sure. Unless you see it in a
Well, I
certain
do
way,
work.
resin.
I do work with a very thin layer of wax, of beeswax, which doesn't seal it, but it does dampen it. It does sort of slow down the process of it, protects the surface a little. So I'm all for slowing it down. Well, I agree with you. If I'm creating something for the outdoors where I deliberately want there to be sharp differences in color, then that would have to be worked on. That would be
I
a
have
challenge.
a relief here in Valletta. The relief of the Pope John Paul II. And I put a brownish patina,
Yeah.
and I put wax over it. Well,
Pigeons.
it takes
The sun.
And,
some the salinity of
yes, salt, simply salt in the air.
That's my
No,
argument.
no, I actually like it green.
No, that you.
It's absolutely wonderful.
If I did the had done the background a different color, let's say 6 months, a year.
Yes, it will change.
Switch turn green.
Yes, pattern, yeah.
So on reliefs, the most important thing is the relief.
Actually, of course.
Yes.
The pattern, the relief, the actual whatever.
Indoors,
Yes.
you can have this differentiated chromatic effects, which on Methodist, because I'm a Methodist, I was trained in Italy, and one of my professors was a god in patterns, god. But indoors,
Yes,
if you
yes.
put it outside,
I think he's right to that,
Yeah,
of course.
but-
the effect is lost. Absolutely.
Well, I won't say that everything ends up looking the same, no matter what you do, but you do lose a lot of the intended effect. I think
For
basically,
example, your pixelated.
yeah, no, I don't think those should be
that
outside.
won't last. It would.
Even inside, they change, but they change slowly. So the only thing, I can never guarantee that my works don't change. In fact, I guarantee the opposite. I guarantee that they do change. But in the case of portraits, I can say that if there is a change that is undoubtedly negative, then I'll fix it. You know, you don't want somebody to have a big dark blotch in half the face, which could happen. You know, so I'll fix it, but it's never happened so far. But I think the specialization of patinas that's a full-time job all of the time. That's very difficult. And I mean, even for indoor artwork, I get constant surprises. So I can just imagine if I were to take it outdoor. But I'm eager to try. There was another question here.
Well, I come from the Lake Superior region, big copper mining, and I was looking at the leafy one, and there are coppers that we have that look like they call it float copper, I think is one of them, and then the mass copper, that's a big clunky thing, and it turns kind of green and white and gray. And have you ever mixed any of the, the natural out of the ground?
Not
Involved with this?
Not yet. Not yet, but I would love to. I would love to somehow incorporate that. I've also actually looked into incorporating zone ore, the Maltese hard rock, into, and it hasn't sort of clicked yet. The inspiration is there, but it hasn't. No, I'm sure that'll come. I think it's a question of discovering it and having it there and touching it, and just all of a sudden there it is. I do have a few pieces of natural copper, and they're so beautiful. It's like, yes, those are what I fill pockets and handbag bags and stuff with. But I haven't yet.
Yes?
I was curious about when you decided to be a full-time artist and you were strategizing. What did you think about your market and how you were going to develop that?
Oh, well, that was hard. I mean, you're better off, it's hard anyway, but you are somewhat better off in Sweden than here. Because I'm from Malta, well, I'm Danish, but I live in Malta. And within a radius of 1 hour, there's 3.2 million people. So immediately you have a much bigger base from which, even if it's a fraction of a percentage, that's going to be a fairly decent amount of people who might potentially like your art if you can find them. A fraction of a percentage in Malta might not be enough for you to actually make a living. So that makes it harder. But what I was doing everything. I was just, we have an expression in Sweden, you need to choose where you use up your ammunition. Because you only have so much. I get suggestions. People will say, oh, but you have exhibitions at golf clubs, and you could do this, and you could do the other. Yeah, I appreciate all these suggestions, but at the end of the day, you only have time, energy, and money for a certain amount of things to try out. And you have to choose very carefully. And most of those, of course, fail. But I think the only way to get the yeses is to just go through all the no's, go through it and learn from it. What's interesting is when things go really well, and you try to trace back that red thread, see what led to this, you end up with something that you didn't think much of. Well, you start off with someone who recommended something that then went to an exhibition where a client saw you and he contacted you years later, and then so basically I think what I did to begin with, which I felt, it was out. Money, time, energy, and I was getting this much back in. I wasn't actually doing anything wrong.
In retrospect, would you have done it differently now that you know what your market is?
No, I think I did things right. Apart from the unavoidable mistakes that you learn from, etc. Generally, I think I did things right. I think the thing was, as a very wise Dane, we have a few of those, he said, we often forget, we're so busy, we forget the 3 T's. Things take time. And that's what it was. I was sowing a lot, getting nothing. It's just that it took a while for me to be able to reap what I actually had sowed. And having been in the game for a long time, I now see that, okay, I'm still sort of, my successes now are a result of the hard work I did years ago. So I keep working hard so it will also go well over there. It's just a question of being cool enough, determined enough, stubborn, ask George, and just hanging in there until it actually works. And that's hard because at first you don't have any proof that it will. There's no saying that, oh, just bear it for long enough and then don't worry. But that was actually the case. So I think I actually did things right. It was just a question of hanging in there long enough to get the results, because people won't buy art, especially when it's something so different. I mean, I'm amazed at how wonderfully well it's gone here. But in Sweden, people perhaps are a bit more conservative. So they would say, oh, that's interesting, but keep their wallet in their back pocket. But second or third time they've seen the exhibition, they might have also read an article or two about me, there's been a review, might have been on TV, over the years, and then they want it. So it was quite a bit of a snowballing effect, or ketchup effect, where when it started happening, it was a whoosh. Because as I said, I didn't have competition in that sense. I wasn't being confused with anyone else. If they wanted my art, had to come to me. There was no one else doing anything remotely like it. So I think generally I did things right. And of course, to begin with, the first years, it was all a matter of, oh, there's this one deal, there's this one client, there's this one thing, and everything hinged on that. And of course, when it didn't work out, that would be devastating. But over time, I would have a much wider base. So if one big client disappeared, I was still stable. If one exhibition fell through, or if something didn't work out, it wasn't that one thing. But of course, there's no shortcut to that. You can't say, I should have that to begin with, because how would you? So, there's a few things I could have done around, and that I would do differently if I could today, but generally, it takes time.
Any last questions? Thank you so much for this wonderful audience, and thank you very much.
The exhibition upstairs is open till 9.
You have 15 minutes if you haven't seen it yet.
And if you haven't seen it before, do have a look now, but do also try to come back in the daytime, because the Maltese light, it does something to the works. See how they change depending on the time of day you're here, depending on the angle you see them from. And I hope you enjoyed it. Go ahead and grab a capital if you haven't got one already. Thank you.